And just a little reminder, ladies and gentlemen, of course, Room 3 has EV charging. Room 2 has leaders and followers, but our theme is industry. Today, you can hear how the grid is being set up to handle the EV revolution, and we have presentations from energy providers and researchers. First up, opportunities, barriers, and bringing V2X together into products. Sounds complex. Fortunately, we have Laura Jones, the senior analyst from the ANU, to explain it. EVs sit uniquely between energy and transport. Not only can your car get you to the shops, it can also power your home or the grid. Laura's talk will paint a picture of some of the ways you might be using your car's battery in the future, focusing on the international experience. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Laura Jones, senior analyst from ANU.
Thank you very much for that introduction, John. Let me just share my screen so you can all see my presentation. Cool, is that working? All good? Cool. So as John said, I'm Laura Jones from the Australian National University. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people here today. We are across Australia, but I'd specifically like to acknowledge the owners of the land I'm on now, which is the Nuinina people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. As I said, I'm Laura Jones from the Australian National University, and I'm a small part of the REVS project, which stands for Realising Electric Vehicle to Grid Services. And this is an electric vehicle to grid services project running the ACT at the moment, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Today, my talk, unsurprisingly, is about V2G. What is it, what's happening with it, and when you might start seeing it. So what is V2G? I think everyone here is familiar with EVs, being an EV conference, but for anyone who isn't, it's like a car, but it runs on electricity. V2G is this concept that once you've put energy into the car, you might want to siphon it back out again and do something non-transport with it. V2G sort of fits in this broader smart charging landscape. You might start with what we call V0g, unsmart charging. This is when you decide when you'd like to charge your electric vehicle by when you plug it in, or maybe a timer built into the car. So this might be how you might traditionally manage how you charge your electric vehicle. At some point, you might want to hand that control over to a system to manage it on your behalf. This might be because someone wants to do something grid related with it. It might be because there is something in your life that makes it a little bit more chaotic and you'd like a system to manage it for you. And then at the bottom of the line there, you've got what we're talking about today, which is this concept of bi-directional charging, this idea that you can take energy back out of a car once you've put it in. There are a lot of different ways people refer to this, and you can see a few of them on the bottom of the slide there. V2H is this concept that you're going to discharge your car into your house to supply your house, store your excess solar, that sort of thing. V2B is to your building, which might be a microgrid, for example. So you might have your car in the basement in the car park and it's sort of supplying the building. V2G is it's going out into the grid for grid services, and X is anything. I'm using V2G as a general term in my presentation just because it's too complicated to refer to lots of different words. But as we've shown here, you can discharge your car. That technology exists and it has been sort of shown in a few places. But I guess the key thing is just because you can doesn't mean that you should. I happened to find this quote by someone named Sherilyn Kennerton on the internet. Perhaps now's a good time for me to introduce what I'm doing in this REVS project, because discharging your car is exactly what we're doing in our project. So this project is a V2G demonstration that's currently running in the ACT in Australia. Essentially what this is it's 51 V2G equipped EVs, mostly in the ACT government fleet, although one of them is in the participating retailer Act2AGL's fleet. And what we're doing with these vehicles and what we're doing with their bidirectional capability is we're using it for something called contingency frequency control, which essentially means that these vehicles respond when bad things happen in the grid. If we lose a generator somewhere, these vehicles will start discharging to try to balance out the mismatch that you get there. If you lose a load somewhere, they'll do the opposite. They'll start charging to increase the load to make up for the bit that you've lost. And as I'll get to a little bit later, this fairly esoteric service is actually worth quite a bit in Australia at the moment. Demonstrations really only make sense if you take their findings and use them in the real world there, though. I mean, you can demonstrate something, but if you don't do anything with the output, there's not a lot of point. We've sort of looked at this in a couple of different ways. One of them is through the partners that we have. We've got a fairly diverse array of partners in this project. Actu AGL's an energy retailer, ACT Government's a government, as you'd expect. The Australian National University, we're sort of the knowledge sharing and research partner. Evo Energy is a distribution network. JetCharge is a charger management platform. And there, I believe that Tim from JetCharge is speaking in another session today. Nissan make cars, and SG Fleet are a fleet company. And I have to acknowledge Arena here. Without Arena putting $2.4 million toward this $6.26 million project, it wouldn't have happened. But as I said before, our role in the project is really about trying to map the path from 51 V2G EVs providing one service to 505 million V2G EVs providing lots of services into the grid. This project relatively recently started, and most of what we've done so far is try to get the chargers so that you can legally connect them in Australia. So I can't tell you how the project's gone, but I can talk to you a bit about what other people have done in the V2G space. V2G is, its genesis was sort of in resilience. After the Fukushima reactor disaster in Japan, they had a lot of energy scarcity. And after that, the people who defined the standard called CHAdeMO, which is a DC charging standard, added V2G capability to their standard so that they could use it in a resilient sense, supplying, in this particular screen cap from the video here, a convenience store in Japan, for example, using a V2G electric vehicle. The thing that's really interesting is because vehicles have wheels, you can charge them in one spot and discharge them in another. But if you take it outside of Japan, most of the use cases that you're seeing tend to be fairly energy system related. And a V2G EV is really just an energy bucket. You can fill it up in one time and place and discharge it in a different one. So it really comes down to where and when is energy useful. And in Australia, there are certainly opportunities at the moment. This graph here shows sort of a picture of average market price. So a significant part of your bill's made up of market price. And it's sort of shown how it's changed between 2010 and 2019. The green is 2010 and the red is 2019. The solid line's the median price. And the range, the shaded area, is the sort of area where the price normally inhabits. So 80% of the time it's within that range. But the key things that I'm really trying to show here is prices have increased quite a bit over the past few years, which sort of describes some of your electricity bill increase. But also they vary in quite a bit. So say you're equipped with a bucket. You might say, well, in the middle of the day when there's a lot of solar generating, prices are generally pretty low. So you charge it then and you discharge it at peak times. This is a common use case of batteries and things like that in the energy market at the moment. But in Australia, the key use case that we're seeing a lot of is actually frequency control. This was one of these weird esoteric services that no one was really interested in for a long time because prices were really, really low. This graph here shows prices in Queensland. And in 2015, they suddenly became really exciting. They increased quite a lot. A lot of that might be due to the rollout of traditional generators who might have been the traditional sources of this sort of service. And you can really see that from the financial results of the batteries that have posted public reports. This is from Escri, which is in South Australia, and they've generated about 600 times more revenue from frequency control as they have from energy market price arbitrage. Gunawarra has been about a factor of 5. But one of the key things that gets energy sort of system people a bit excited is this concept of what happens when everyone charges their car at once. This graph here shows the impact of electric vehicles on peak demand. In this particular case in the UK, this is a project called My Electric Avenue. And what they did was they encouraged a whole bunch of people on a single street to buy electric vehicles and then tried to have a look at what happened on the grid with these vehicles. And they showed that you sort of increased the peak demand by about a factor of 2. This is a little bit worrying because what it means is that you need about twice as much network to supply these customers. And when you build network, it costs money, which means your bills go up. So it's a fairly key thing of if you can shift that charging outside of peak demand, or you can discharge during peak demand, you can reduce the size of the network that you need. And indeed, they showed that that worked. But the key thing about all of this stuff that I've talked to you about is, to me, it doesn't really get to the really exciting use cases of V2G. They're sort of the same ways you might use a battery. When you look at some of the interesting things that you might do with V2G, it sort of relates to how do you use something that can move? And we talked about resilience earlier. And there are other interesting use cases that are sort of being built, narratives that are being built at the moment. This picture here is from Targa, Western Australia. I don't know how many people sort of pay attention to car racing, but in Western Australia, in Targa there, which is a road rally, a Model 3 won quite handily. And one of the things that it used to win was the fact that they were charging their Model 3 from a Kona, which is another electric car. So this electric car was acting as a charger for a different electric car. As well as being cool, this sort of shows me that V2G is a tool we haven't quite finished working out the interesting ways you can use it yet. For me, the really exciting things are about resilience. They're about off-grid supply and extending these use cases outside of Japan into the rest of the world. This may or may not be something that excites you, but I guess the key question is, can you get one? One of our partners, JetCharge, is currently, as I said, we're going through the process of getting these things approved to connect in Australia. And you'll be able to buy one from JetCharge quite soon. At the moment, though, end users purchasing V2G chargers are quite rare. They're expensive, and all of these energy system benefits that I've talked about, which can make quite a big financial return for people, is sort of inaccessible to an individual customer. You've got to rely on other people to procure these benefits for you. You often see these things as part of VPP style products. Here are some sort of screen caps from 3 of these different products that are happening in the UK at the moment. Powerloop is by an energy retailer called Octopus, and they've rolled this into a vehicle lease. OVO, who's an energy retailer in the UK as well, give you a free charger and sort of a feed-in tariff. And their one down the bottom there is from a project called Electric Nation Recharged, which is run by a distribution network in the UK, which is a free charger, and they're still trying to work out what it looks like day to day. You've also see other ones like somewhere they're integrated into parking chargers and stuff like that. These use cases, again, are still generally very much like batteries. So I guess the key question, and this is one where we really want to hear from people like you, the people who might be the future users of V2G, what really gets you excited when it comes to V2G? So in our project, in our Realising Electric Vehicle to Grid Services project, we really like to hear from you. We have a sociologist on the project named Catherine Lucas-Healy, and she really wants to hear from you and talk to you about your interesting V2G use cases, about the things that really interest you in this space. So please reach out to her. Her contact details are here, and I'll ask the organisers whether they can send this out post-event. And she'd quite like to hear from you and hear about all of your interesting V2G thoughts. So thank you very much. I think we're moving on to the next presentation with questions at the end, if I'm correct. And I'm just going to unshare my screen here so the next speaker can start. Thank you.
Fantastic, Laura. I saw this announced in 2017, and lo and behold, here it is becoming a reality. That's vision in action. Well done to you and your team.